A lot going on economically in the world since we last spoke. The stimulus package has passed. I don't know if you want to get involved in this. One kind of interesting thing that I find, I'm no doctor of economics. I'm just a simple guy that grew up on the West Bank, went to Shaw, and then went to UNO. But I got to tell you, I find it interesting that we had to hurry up and get this thing passed on Friday the 13th because there was no time to spare. It had to be done right away. Time was of the essence. The economy was failing. People were out of work. We didn't have time to debate it. And then it sits around for 4 days waiting on a president's signature. Seems to me we could have debated that for 4 days and found out what exactly was in it, but maybe that's a conversation for another night. I don't know. I find it interesting.
No, that's a great conversation.
Isn't that kind of odd?
Very, very odd. I think that the best commentary on this was the Mardi Gras parades when they were talking about stimulus and they were putting a sexual overtone on it.
I didn't see that. I don't know.
That makes as much sense to me as anything that comes from Washington.
It's like we didn't have any time to debate this. We write the bill Thursday night, and then Congress gets it hours later, and they got to vote on it right away. The House has to vote on it right away. We don't have any time to discuss it. This has to be done right away. So they vote on it, and they pass it, and then it goes to the Senate. We don't have any time to discuss it. Don't you understand? People are out of work. This has to be done right. But it might. We don't have any time to talk about that. But it might change. But we don't have any time to talk. This has to be done right away. Don't you get it? So they hurry up, and they pass it Friday night, and that was the 13th, and today's the what? The 16th, and it still hasn't been signed, and I think the president's going to sign it tomorrow afternoon in Denver, and I just wonder, man, that's 4 days. We could have been talking about that the whole time, and they could have passed it tonight or tomorrow morning, and he could have signed it then, and that's a whole lot of time for discussion, but nobody seems to be paying any attention to that, and I find that odd. But
well, this is just the hypocrisy of Washington, and this bill is just the tip of the iceberg in that regard. A lot of these bills are 300, 400, 500 pages of very small, single-space type, and these people in Congress don't read every last word of these things. The whole thing is sort of a charade where people put in all sorts of pork for well-regarded in-groups and clients of the ruling class, if I can use such a word. Look, let me talk just a little bit.
Go ahead, Professor. It's your show. It's your hour.
Well, no. You the man, as they say.
No, I'm merely the announcer. I'm the Al Michaels. You are the John Madden of Monday Night Economics.
Okay, well, I'll try to be worthy of that. One of the things that President
Obama.
Let me say.
I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say. What's his name? Not John Maynard Obama. Franklin Delano Obama. And I have to give him all sorts of compliments. He's a magnificent speaker. He's a wonderful orator. He speaks beautifully. I wish I could speak half as well as him, but, he's a socialist, so it sort of takes away from that. But the thing that he was brooding about very heavily, relying upon in order to get his package passed, was 4 million Americans are out of work. And then he goes to, where was it, Peoria, where the Caterpillar were firing 22,000 people, and, Microsoft fired 5,000 or let go 5,000, and Wall Street is hemorrhaging jobs. Well, for the economist, you just don't talk about jobs, you talk about jobs at a certain wage rate. And the key here is that everyone can get work as long as the wages fall. Because the essence of economics, pretty much economics doesn't have much more to say than this, is supply and demand. And if there's unemployment, that means that the wage rate is higher than the appropriate wage rate, and all that has to happen and would happen with the magic of the market is that wages would fall. However, if you have unemployment insurance and welfare and things like that, then people are not going to allow wages to fall. And if you have unions propping up wages, and Obama is now trying to make it easier to unionize the labor force, it's very, very similar to what FDR was doing in propping up wages. So he's sort of really barking up the wrong tree. If he wants to save these jobs, these 4 million jobs, all he has to do is allow the magic of the marketplace to work, allow wages to fall, get rid of unemployment insurance, welfare, minimum wage laws, things like that, and then there'll be no unemployment. But instead, what he's doing is taking money from Peter, which increases Peter's unemployment, and giving it to Paul, which does get him a job, but how that helps on net benefit is really beyond common sense.
If what you're hearing right now is making you want to drive into a tree because you're saying, how can the professors say that? Please don't drive into a tree. Please instead pick up the phone and call 260-1870, toll-free 866-889-0870, and engage the professor in spirited but polite and dignified discourse. That is what Monday Night Economics are all about. The professor is a monetarist, the opposite of a Keynesian economist, and he makes no bones about it. He proudly defends that. Professor, you said the president was a socialist. That is your opinion. That is your professional opinion. But let me just read this to you. This is from a New York Times article that was published today. It also appeared on the front page of the Times-Picayune. We had a discussion last week. My friend, what was the guy's name that called in? Malachi. And I quoted an article that was in Bloomberg.com, and he thought that I was making this stuff up. Now the New York Times publishes it. This is what the stimulus bill contains. It provides $1.1 billion for researchers, I'm quoting the article now, to compare drugs, medical devices, surgery, and other ways of treating specific conditions. It creates a council of as many as 15 federal employees to coordinate the research and to advise President Barack Obama and Congress on how to spend the money. Now, some people would call that healthcare rationing. Now, when Bloomberg reported this last week, people were saying, you don't know that's really going to happen. Now, when the bastion, and I say this somewhat sarcastically, of journalism, the New York Times reports it, everybody says, it's true. Now, the two questions, well, wait, let me make an observation first, then I'll ask you the question. I find it odd that the New York Times suddenly realized this was going to happen after the legislation was passed. They didn't realize this was going to happen last week while it was pending. Suddenly, after it's passed, they decide to run an article on it as though, here we are, the Fourth Estate, we're keeping an eye on everything for you. After it's too late, they publish it. But my question to you, Doctor, is how does a 15-person federal employee council to coordinate the research on rationing health care, how does that stimulate the economy? Because it's a stimulus bill, isn't it? There's a stimulus package.
Yeah.
How does that stimulate the economy? I'm a little curious here.
Well, it'll stimulate a very small part of the economy. It'll stimulate jobs for those 15.
For those 15 bureaucrats.
Right.
Other than that, not so much.
No, they'll be able to shuffle paper, and they'll have secretaries, and they'll need chauffeurs. There'll be all sorts of jobs. But the money that pays these people to do all this silly paperwork comes from hardworking Americans who won't have jobs and who won't have wealth. And it's just taking money from everywhere else and giving it to Washington. Do you know where the 7 richest counties are in the whole United States?
I wish you'd tell me.
I'll give you one guess. They're all surrounding Washington, D.C.
No.
Yes.
Really?
I know you're shocked.
Yeah. So, in other words, people that perhaps could be siphoning money off of the government.
Yes.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yes, it's amazing.
So, in other words, a self-perpetuating cycle of bureaucrats that continue to keep themselves employed by the government by creating a bigger bureaucracy to keep those paychecks rolling in.
These people are like vampires. They're sucking the blood out of the economy, and they're putting it around Washington, D.C., and there'll be no shortage of chauffeur-driven Cadillacs and,
town cars, what have you.
Town cars and all sorts of good stuff, and I'm sure the top-level restaurants in Washington, D.C. will be doing well.
You might want to make sure and declare those town cars as income.
Oh, yes.
Because it could derail your appointment later on.
Right.
And the only thing I'll say before we pause here, and then we'll come back and take phone calls, and I want to talk to you about the GM thing, too, because the automakers have to present their new plan tomorrow, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Before we end the hour tonight, is that, as a taxpayer, the only thing I wish is that if you were going to include stuff like this in that stimulus plan, is that you just be upfront about it and call it a stimulus health care reform plan. Don't just call it a stimulus plan if you're going to have stuff like this in it, is all I'm saying.
Call it pork stimulus.
Yeah, whatever you want to do. If you want to reform the health care system, don't say it's strictly economic stimulus, because it's not. Be honest and forthright. We'll be right back. It's Monday Night Economics. If you disagree with the professor, again, the only rules are polite, respectful discourse. Don't resort to name-calling, and don't resort to screaming, because usually, what's the old saying? If you can't pound the facts, and if you can't pound the law or statistics, pound the table. We don't do that here. Make sure you have facts and make sure you have a learned point of view, because name-calling, I'll cut you off quicker than a wife who finds out she's been cheated upon. We'll be right back. Monday Night Economics, Dr. Walter Block, our guest. He's a professor of economics at Loyola. He's a monetarist. He makes no bones about it. Not a Keynesian. I'm Tommy Tucker. We'll be right back. Big 870 WWL. Another edition of Monday Night Economics with our guest, Dr. Walter Block, a professor of economics at Loyola University here in New Orleans. If you want to get involved, 260-1870, toll free. From anywhere in the nation, 1-866-889-0870. Professor, I'm not saying it wrong when I say you're a monetarist, am I?
Well, actually, I'm an Austrian economist. The two main schools of thought are the monetarists and the Keynesians. They're the neoclassical people.
All right, what's the difference now between a monetarist and an Austrian school of what would you say? An Austrian what?
Austrian school of thought. The difference between us and the Keynesians, and I would say the Keynesians are the fiscalists and the monetarists. They're between them the major view in economics. The difference between us is that both of them are really Keynesians, only the monetarists believe in monetary policy and the non-monetarist Keynesians believe in fiscal policy. We Austrians don't believe in any policy. We believe in the free enterprise system.
Completely laissez-faire. Just let the market dictate it, right?
Absolutely. Get rid of the Fed, get rid of the fiat currency, go back to the gold standard, get rid of fractional reserve banking. In our view, the reason we have the crisis that we have is because of the government, and asking government to solve it is like asking the fox to guard the chicken coop, or trying to pour gasoline on a fire that you started with gasoline in the hope that it'll go out this time. It's just silly.
So the question that's out there, though, like a hanging curveball, is what about the social ramifications, the ills that occur as a result of that? That's just part and parcel of the economic system, and the things that happen, and they in turn will affect the market and will cause the market to correct itself?
Yes, the market is self-correcting, contrary to Alan Greenspan, who really ought to be strung up for being a traitor to his earlier beliefs of laissez-faire capitalism. The market has within it the solution to these problems, and if we had a market in the first place, we wouldn't have had these problems. People say, well, we've got deregulation. We don't have deregulation. What we have is U.S. fiat currency and artificially lowering interest rates and messing up market signals. So the reason, and the CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act, all sorts of government mismanagement caused the thing, and the stimulus, so-called stimulus, is just going to worsen the matter, not improve it.
Now, do you think that there's no part for government regulation at all? Because what happens if there's collusion on the part of companies and there's not fair competition? Doesn't that throw everything out of kilter or not?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I don't believe in antitrust. I think that the entire antitrust law, the so-called anti-monopoly, should be rescinded. The only real monopoly that we've got is government monopoly. Look, if you and I want to set up a new newspaper to compete against the Times-Picayune, which, say, is now the only major daily in New Orleans, will we go to jail for that? No. So there's free entry, there's free competition.
All right, what about in the case of something where there's limited things, like limited, for example, limited resources, for example, of radio or television frequencies? There are only so many of them. Should the government regulate that or not?
But look, there's only so much newsprint. No, I don't think.
No, that's not true. You can have so long as the market will sustain it. If you've got the capital, you can set up a printing press. There is, for all intents and purposes, unlimited paper. You can print as many newspapers as you want, as long as you've got the capital to set up a building, to set up a printing press. If the market will sustain it, you can have 18 newspapers, but there are only so many radio frequencies. You got to admit there's a difference.
No, I don't admit there's a difference. Right now, there's only a finite number of newsprint and printing presses and ink. There's a lot more available than there are newspapers, but there's only...
Professor, you could create as many printing presses. You could have new printing presses manufactured, especially in this computer day and age, as many as the market would demand be created, but not the case with radio frequencies.
Let me stipulate that you're correct, even though we disagree on that.
Okay.
It really still doesn't matter. First of all, there's a lot more...
Wait, why doesn't it matter?
Well, the reason it doesn't matter is because, first of all, there is a lot more bandwidth than is actually used. But let's suppose that there's only, I don't know, room for 100 radio stations in New Orleans or what have you. Well, suppose I want to buy them all up. What happens that suppose I buy up 2 or 3, and the more I buy up, the more valuable the remaining ones get that I haven't yet purchased, and so it becomes very, very difficult for me to get them all. And, suppose I get them all. Well, so what? That's the market. Everyone's going to hear Walter Block theories 24/7. But if I'm able to buy it up, that means that someone was willing to sell it to me.
And then according to your theory, I don't have to listen to the radio if I don't want to. Then I can go find other sources of information or entertainment if I choose to. I can listen to CDs, I can listen to MP3s, what have you.
There's TV, there's, there's newspapers, there's magazines.
In the pure market, you're saying.
But it would be very, very difficult for me, or you and I as partners, to buy up all the radio stations in New Orleans area, because, as I say, as we started buying up a few, word would get out, and then the others would be very much more precious, because they would be an alternative viewpoint.
You see, now that, ladies and gentlemen, is the way your phone calls should go. You can disagree, but you have to do it respectfully. To the phone lines we go. Mason on a cell. Thank you for calling. You're on WWL.
Good evening, gentlemen.
How you doing?
All right. I have first I'll make a comment and then I have a question.
Okay.
The professor is talking about, basically what he's talking about, economic anarchy, where on one hand we tell the public, or we tell, like on your radio station, that we don't need regulations, we don't need this, but the economy basically take care of itself, the market take care of itself.
That's the professor's theory.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a very accurate rendition of my view.
That is not so? Am I wrong about that?
No, he said that was an accurate rendition of his view. That's an accurate portrayal of his opinion.
An accurate
his
summary.
Yeah.
In the other hand, he suggested that we should bring the wages down. And, well, I'm just have two questions here. One.
But wait, hang on a second. What is that what you said, Professor? Bring the wages down, or let the market dictate that the wages go down?
Let the market lower wages and take away the props that government puts under wages, such as unions and unemployment insurance and welfare.
Do you get that distinction, Mason, the difference between the two?
Well, I do, but there's only one problem with that. When you have a government that we call this republic, democracy, whatever you want to call it, we elected these officials to go into these offices, and then we're going to say, well, no, that's not the way we wanted you to do it. Let's do it this way. Then, if that's the case, there is a problem with that. In one hand, we say, give it to the people who already have, let's say, a factory, a company, or a banker, and eventually find his way down to the smaller people in our community, and maybe they will start a new business, maybe they'll start a new newspaper or a radio station, perhaps. On the other hand, you're saying, let them do whatever they want.
Wait, hang on, Mason. Let me take it one step at a time here. Let me, if I'm reading you correctly, let me present this to the professor. What you're saying, Mason, is what's to prevent a group of business people from getting together, and again, that goes to collusion where there is no competition, and permanently creating a lower class where it's like, well, you know what, we're going to artificially keep wages at $10 an hour, and if we all band together, we never have to pay more than that. Is that what you're saying, Mason?
Well, that's what I'm hearing, and my question was, let's say, okay, take Japan, which is the second biggest economy in the world, and because of its size, if Japan was as big as America, it would be the number one economy in the world, perhaps. My point is, what is the minimum wage in Japan?
I don't know. Is there a minimum wage in Japan, Professor?
I'm pretty sure there is. I don't know for sure, but I expect that there is.
All right, and I would bet the professor every dime I have, which is not many, that in Japan or in Germany, or you can name a few other countries if you want, the minimum wage is much higher than it is in the U.S. Never mind the health care and all the benefits that they have.
Well, let me try to answer both these questions. One, the collusion, and the other, what I got out of this question was this trickle-down theory. As far as collusion, suppose all the employers got together and said, look, we're not paying more than $10 an hour, period, even though our workers are worth way more than $10 an hour. Well, there would be a dissolution of this collusion, this cartel, from the inside and from the outside.
How so?
From the inside, at that lower wage, each of them would be hiring fewer workers than he would really like, and he'd like to hire more. So what he would like to do is tell everyone, yes, I'm doing that, I'm cutting back on my wages, but then secretly hire extra workers. So the cartel would break down from that.
Wait, why would that happen?
Well, if you lower the wages, you have to hire fewer people. You can't hire as many as you want.
Why? I'm not getting it.
Well,
no, it's actually
this is a beginner. This is economics 101, Professor.
Yes, this is economics.
You take, for example, the farm workers in California, which most of them come from South and Central America, and the undocumented. That's another story altogether. I'm not talking about immigration here. I'm talking about the fact that you have a bunch of people who are willing to work for less money because of the situation in their home countries. That's a different issue. But
wait, hang on.
These people who are making
hang on, Mason. Let me get through this for a second.
Let me answer this question. Suppose that the real market wage, and everyone was about the same, so we abstract from that problem. Let's suppose that the real market wage would have been $15 an hour, but due to collusion, we push it down to 10.
Okay.
Well, at a wage below the equilibrium level, demand is greater than supply. Namely, the employers want more workers, and the suppliers are willing to give less work, so there's a shortage of workers. Just as when you have a minimum wage above equilibrium, there's a surplus.
Okay.
When you're below equilibrium, as we now are, there's a shortage. And when there's a shortage, everyone wants to hire more workers, and the only way to hire more workers is to pay a little bit more.
Okay.
But the collusion is also subject to breakdown from outside, because at this lower wage, there are going to be vast profits. So what's to stop somebody who's not part of this collusion, or an independent worker who decides to go out on his own and set up a new firm? He could then hire all these workers. So these sorts of collusions don't usually work in the market. They do work when the government supports them through unions. And speaking of which, the caller was mentioning the importance of democracy. But right now, if you want to start a union, the way to do it is you have to get signatures from, I don't know what percentage, 30 or 40% of the workers, and then they have a secret ballot to see if the union is supported. But what the unions want, and Obama, I think, is going to go along with this, is as soon as you get 50% of the workers to sign those cards, you don't have to have a secret ballot election. And then you have all sorts of threats.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's easy to just sign the card, no big deal, but then in the secret ballot you vote against the union if you want to. But under this new system, which is a blatant violation of the so-called democratic principles, people will be able to be bullied into signing these cards, and we're going to have a lot more unionism than we have.
What is the rationale behind doing away with the secret, or I think it's the Austrian ballot, isn't it? Or no, Australian ballot, actually.
Well,
what's the rationale behind that? What is the selling point? How do they think that's... Well, who would willingly want to do away with that? I'm not grasping that.
Well, you see, unions don't like secret ballots because they lose a lot of elections.
That I get. I don't get from the individual who would want to do away with their right to cast their ballot in secret.
Oh, the individuals don't want to. It's the union leaders who want it, and Obama's going to pay them off for supporting him during the recent election.
All right, Mason, back to you now. So you're saying what?
Well, I'm not sure if that would be an accusation of what Obama might or might not do. First of all, unless the professor knows something that we don't, he's going to pay off the unions. But okay, let's go back to the unions. If you really want to know, go back to the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. The biggest communist movement outside Russia at the time was in the United States. Am I correct about that, Professor?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Go.
Okay. And when the capitalists, if you will, and I'm not for any of the ism, capitalism, communism, I'm not for any of them, but they realized that this is really taking root in America, and they feared that they're going to lose all the land, all the money. And at the time, women had very little rights, blacks or minorities had no rights, basically. What they did, they started building roads, hospitals, schools, and because of fear. And the workers' rights came to play, basically, when you arrived right around, let's say, World War I. And that's when the unions really started becoming strong, because at the time, the people who had a lot of money, the capitalists, if you will, they were not willing to share that money with the people who were actually making them capitalist. And that's why you had the labor movement and the unions were created, because they were not getting their fair share. So is the union corrupt? Perhaps. In some areas are good, some areas are bad, some areas are terrible. But that is not to say, I'll give you an example. For example, take the church. Is the church terrible? Is it bad? Some places, sometimes, because they have a lot of problems. But does that mean they have to completely demolish all the churches or the organization? No.
Well, I think that the case against union is much more deep-seated than just a little corruption. If that were all that there were, I mean, every facet of society has corruption. No, I think that...
But I understand that, Professor. My question
the unions...
Hang on, Mason.
We have had, right now...
Mason, hang on. Go ahead, Professor.
The unions are problematic because they don't really raise wages. The highest amount of unionism in our society was in the 50s, when we had, in the 1950s, when about half of the labor force was unionized. But we've had fantastic growth since then, and now the private sector unionization rate is about 9%, namely it's in single digits. No, the main effect of unions is to bankrupt companies. They're sort of like an economic tapeworm. We have this thing called the Rust Belt, which stretches all the way from Detroit to Boston, and it's filled with empty factories and mills and places like that, because the unions are so vicious that they push wages up above productivity levels, which means that the companies that employ them can't make a profit. So they either went broke or they moved down around here. They moved to Birmingham, Alabama. They moved to Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana.
Mason, we have to pause here for a minute, and we have to move on to other callers. But quickly, how would you explain away that Rust Belt?
How would I explain the what? I'm sorry.
The Rust Belt that the professor just alluded to.
Poor management.
Well, they're doing fine in Alabama. They're doing fine in Shreveport. They're doing fine in Mississippi.
That wasn't the question, Professor. He asked me, what do you think about generally in the entire country?
No, I said, how would you explain away the Rust Belt? You said poor management. The professor responded by saying, well, they're doing fine in non-union states.
Right.
So I would ask you then, Mason, how would you respond to that?
Well, free market dictates, like the professor said, and the free market says that people wanted Japanese cars. So, I mean, you have to either go with one ideology. You can't have it both ways. If free market dictates that I want to buy a Toyota instead of a Ford, then I'll do it.
All right, Mason, we got to leave it there and agree to disagree. We will pause for a moment. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. How do you feel about that? Professor, quickly, Social Security, yes, no?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so the professor says no welfare, no Social Security, no unemployment, no food stamps, no nothing. It is a completely, in his opinion, it's an abomination. He says laissez-faire economy, which means leave the market alone, let it adjust completely, and all the government's doing is screwing it up. Every time they tinker with it, it's like fooling with an ecosystem. You know how they'll put in a bird to take care of something, an insect, and then before you know it, the whole thing's out of kilter? He says that's what the government's doing with the economy. What do y'all think? 260-1870, toll free, 1-866-889-0870. Monday Night Economics. I'm Tommy Tucker, back in a flash on the Big 870 WWL. Along with Dr. Walter Block, a professor of economics at Loyola University. Professor Block subscribes to the Austrian School of Economics. Did I say that right, Professor?
Yes, absolutely correctly.
And he makes no apologies for it at all. And, Professor, I think if you could just come out of your shell and be willing to tell people how it is you really feel, I think you'll be okay.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. Could I share my antitrust joke with you?
Absolutely, please.
Okay. Well, look, when an economist tells a joke, it's sort of like when a bear plays the violin while riding a unicycle.
Doesn't happen often.
It's a little rough to ask if he's in tune, So when an economist tells a joke, it's a bit harsh to ask if it was funny.
Okay.
That's not the point.
Sure.
Okay. It's a two-part joke. The first part, there were 3 Soviet prisoners in the Gulag, and as prisoners do, they compared notes as to why they're in jail. And the first guy said, well, I came to work late, and they accused me of cheating the state out of my labor services. The second guy said, well, I came to work early, and they accused me of brown-nosing. The third guy said, I came to work every day exactly on time, and they accused me of owning a Western wristwatch. Okay, not too bad for an economist.
Right.
Now, here's the antitrust part. There were 3 U.S. prisoners in the U.S. gulag for violating antitrust law. And the first guy said, well, I charged higher prices than everyone else, and they accused me of profiteering. The second guy said, I charged lower prices than everyone else, and they accused me of cutthroat competition and predatory pricing. The third guy said, I charged the same prices as everyone else. It's hard to see how he did that given the other 2,
right.
But in any case, and they accused him of cartelization and collusion. The point is that antitrust is not a legitimate law.
Uh-huh.
You see, the law against murder and the law against rape are legitimate laws. If you murder or rape, you go to jail. If you don't, then you're okay. But in antitrust, they can get you on anything. Poor Bill Gates, what they got him on was he didn't give money to the boys in Washington. He was just sitting out there in Seattle doing his thing and sort of ignoring everyone, and they couldn't tolerate that. So they came after him, and it didn't matter whether it was high or low price or the same price. They're going to get him on something. See, this is not a legitimate law if you can be guilty no matter what you do, higher, lower, or the same price. That's just despicable.
And if you're sitting there saying, "Oh, it really wasn't funny," the professor wasn't trying to amuse you. He was trying to make a point, and he did with me. Fred in Texas, you're on WWL. Go ahead.
Yeah, I got a comment and then a question.
Go ahead.
The comment quickly is supply and demand. If General Motors gets $35,000 for their new vehicles, and they're paying out millions of dollars a month in retirement pensions,
legacy cost, right?
While Volvo gets $22,000 with less cost, they sell more cars and they're just as good. Who's to blame? You know, a normal human being for getting something cheaper. That point is well taken against the unions. It always has been. And bottom line is greed.
Fred, let me tell you real quick. You know, I've been buying Toyotas for a long time, and I didn't think that was unpatriotic of me. I really didn't. I always thought the most unpatriotic thing I could do was to subsidize an inferior product. That's just the way I looked at it.
There you go. That's it. I mean, who's going to be stupid to buy something that costs $10,000 more for the same quality? And my second point is this. Put a priority 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and drill for oil. Stop paying our enemies $2-3 billion a week for oil. Put people to work building refineries, pipelines, and prioritize it. We could get pipelines drilling oil in 2 years or less if they put their minds to it and put people to work.
All right, Fred, a lot of that money comes back at us in the form of weapons. Professor, we got to pause here for a minute. When we come back, I definitely want to get your opinion on what's going to happen tomorrow with GM and, you know, GM specifically, given the government apparently they're going to, at least a story in the Wall Street Journal says, is going to give us 2 choices, either more bailout money or help us with bankruptcy. Those are the 2 choices, and I think I pretty well know how you're going to stand on this, but I want to get your take anyway when we come back. Big 870 WWL. A few minutes left with Professor Walter Block from Loyola, an economist. And, Professor, I'm guessing you wouldn't give GM a penny.
Well, you know, it's interesting with GM. I certainly wouldn't give them a penny, but what Barack Obama is incensed about is the fact that these companies that are seeking bailouts are giving themselves bonuses and still enjoying gigantic salaries. You see, in the free enterprise system, that wouldn't happen. In the free enterprise system, if there were a CEO who was hogging up all the money and taking inordinate salaries and bonuses and this and that and the other and golden parachutes and whatever, what would happen to the stock value of his company? Well, the stock value would plummet because instead of giving the stockholders the money in the form of dividends, he's in effect hogging it all up in the form of CEO salaries. So the market's answer was this guy named Michael Milken. Michael Milken was a junk bond dealer. He would swoop in on companies like that. He'd buy up the stocks at the artificially lowered values, lowered because of the CEO high salaries. He'd buy up these shares, and then he'd kick out the bad guys, and he would, rationalize the company. That was the market's way of dealing with astronomical CEO salaries. But what happened to Michael Milken?
I believe he went to jail, didn't he?
Absolutely, he went to jail. So here you have these socialists, these fascists, who complain about the market leading to ungodly CEO salaries, if I can use that expression, and they take away the market's fail-safe mechanism. They take away the market's way of dealing with this, and then they say, aha, you see the free enterprise system has failed. We, the government, have to step in. But the government has already stepped in and put Michael Milken in jail. And Michael Milken was very efficient at stopping, and not just him, but when he went to jail, other people who did this also, pulled in their horns. So this is just one more example of free markets work, and then they hamstring the free market, and then they blame the free market for not working.
Just so you know, the executive compensation, limiting that didn't make it into the stimulus bill because the Congressional Budget Office showed them that it was going to cost the Treasury billions of dollars, and they quietly let that lapse. Gene and Slidell, quickly, your comment about Social Security.
Tommy, Professor?
Yes.
On the Social Security, you saying about doing away with Social Security. What would be the replacement, if any, for people already on Social Security?
Well, people already on Social Security is a very different thing. What we should do is sell off some of the government holdings of land and give it to the people. But you see, the whole idea of Social Security is that you're stupid. You're too stupid to save for your old age. So we, the government, are going to force you to save for your old age, and it's really a Ponzi scheme because they don't keep the money. Rather, what they do
is... Professor, we're out of time, but that's an excellent way to put it. We'll pick it up right there next week on Monday Night Economics. Thank you, Dr. Walter Block.